The book I have selected is A New Culture of Learning, Cultivating the Imagination for a World of Constant Change by Douglas Thomas and John Seely Brown. The choice of wording in the title, particularly the emphasis on culture and cultivation, became clear very early into the text. I'll come back to that a little bit later on. I selected this book for two reasons. First, the topics of 21st century learning, digital literacy, and informal learning fit well with my own research interests and are ideas that I have been exploring in my own teaching practices. Second, during my last course, Digital Literacies with Professor Morby, I had the opportunity to read another piece by John Seely Brown, Growing Up Digital, from 2000. I thought it was an interesting and evocative article, written at a time when the internet was just emerging in popular usage. Much had changed in the time since that article was written, and perhaps now even more so since this book was written 5 years ago. As an aside here, I also was introduced to Ursula Franklin by Professor Morby, and I'll come back to her in just a minute. The book opens with a question. What happens to learning when we move from the stable infrastructure of the 20th century to the fluid infrastructure of the 21st century, where technology is constantly creating and responding to change? The question is important because the rate of change to technology and how we learn is not slowing. It is evolving regardless of whether educational institutions get on board with those changes or not. They use the example of color televisions and how it took nearly 70 years for it to be widely accepted and used, as compared to the internet, which became commonplace in the span of a decade. The authors go on to liken these changes in technology to play, specifically how, in the case of both technology and play, there are boundaries, but within those boundaries there is freedom. This is also where the salience of the word cultivating in the title of the book comes into meaning. The authors use the analogy of a garden, an area with fixed dimensions, but limitless possibilities. One of the key elements of these changes to education are the kinds of interactions that take place between people because of technology. The authors use a series of anecdotes to illustrate how technology and online communities have had positive impacts on learning and social interactions. There's the kid, Sam, who learns about being a good online citizen while learning to program using Scratch. The gaming professor, one of the authors, who learns to release control of learning to his students. There are several more, but they become less poignant as they go. Essentially, the anecdotes serve to show that learning and social bonds do not have to occur and be built in the ways they have been in the past, and that those online interactions are more than just the sum of their parts. The authors liken the way formal education has been carried out over the last century to being like a machine, referring to it as mechanistic. Ursula Franklin would probably use the term prescriptive to describe it. I told you she'd come back. What the authors are arguing for is to look at education instead as learning environments, or holistically in Franklin's terms, with boundaries that define it and urge the learners along without the needless standardization and measurement. Again, back to the garden metaphor. Here's where the importance of the title of the book, A New Culture of Learning, gains traction. The authors stress that they are not talking about culture in the sense of something that people build and create through shared values and beliefs, but rather in the scientific sense of growing a culture in a petri dish, where parameters are set and then you watch what happens. They see the culture of learning in the same way. And here's a short quote from page 37. It makes no sense to think of people adapting to what they are already doing, but it does make sense to see them as functioning within a broader culture and creating it rather than merely responding. Thomas and Brown look at the new culture of learning as one that is constantly changing, and it is our job to embrace that change, not to fight it or adapt to it, but to accept it and experience it. They outline 3 principles of the new culture of learning. Number 1, the old ways of learning are unable to keep up with our rapidly changing world. 2, new media forms are making peer-to-peer learning easier and more natural. And 3, peer-to-peer learning is amplified by emerging technologies that shape the collective nature of participation.